All right, everybody, it's that time of year again. One of our favorites, basketball season. The New Bloods are back at the Tuck. Leonard Hamilton Seminoles for the 2022-2023 season, which means Tuck Talk is back as well. Something Bob and I have been so excited to do for the past couple of years. Interviews with former players, with current coaches, with national analysts, with current players. I mean, it's been the whole nine. And we're excited to welcome in Curt Weiler, who joins our team this year at the Osceola, covered Florida State basketball for a number of years with Tomahawk Nation and the Tallahassee Democrat. And Kurt's going to be a great addition to our team for hoops. He knows the game. He's a Hawks fan. We'll let that slide as Heat fans, but he's going to have a blast covering basketball. Bob and Curt, say hello to the people.
Hello, people.
Hello, people. We are here. We're recording this. We're in Miami, getting ready to go to the Florida State-Miami game tonight. But we need to, with basketball season 2 days away, we got to get basketball its due here.
We're juggling.
Yeah, this is how dedicated we are to our listeners. Bob and Curt are in Miami for Florida State in Miami. That should be fun. I'm in Orlando getting ready for an ESPN soccer game tomorrow. Which I say tomorrow. Today is Saturday when we're recording this, Sunday for the American Conference Championship on ESPN. So we wanted to talk some hoops. We love it. And I think as we get set for this season, I'm sorry I sigh because I had a lot of hope, a lot of optimism going into the year. The Noles went and got some really good pieces, but two of the main pieces that they got are either hurt for the year or are ineligible thanks to a governing body that I will not name because it's like Voldemort in Harry Potter. He who shall not be named. Guys, what's the overall vibe from your preseason conversations and observations of this Florida State basketball program as they head into the new year?
I think this is going to be a PG-13 pod, so I'll just start by saying screw the NCAA. Let's start the vibe right there. I think the other vibe is, hey, it's fine if you're not optimistic about this team based on injuries and a suspension, none of which are in the coach's control, players' control, the team's control. But let's at least be curious. Let's at least be a little bit curious how the pieces come together. You got some good young freshmen, really athletic. You got a really hot shooting transfer in Darren Green Jr. And we like to see how these second-year veterans that Leonard Hamilton keeps kind of talking about. I think he's kind of throwing that word or that phrase out there, maybe sideways as kind of a connotation to say this isn't a senior-laden team. They truly don't have a senior on the roster, which is just dumbfounding because that's the way Leonard Hamilton, Stan Jones, and the guys win. But I'm still curious. I think I like being curious. That's where I am.
Yeah, there's a lot to like still about the pace team without a Jalen Gainey, as you mentioned, and even without a Baba Miller for half the season. I think the hope has to be, it's a talented enough team where, in theory, they could do well enough without Baba that they will have a chance when they get Baba back, because they'll have Baba back for the stretch run. So really the first half of the season, when your front court's going to be really depleted without those two, is going to be about kind of just doing enough to not totally bury yourself or put your resume in a really troublesome spot where you'd almost have to win the ACC tournament. There are reasons to think FSU's capable of doing that. Bringing back a guy like Caleb Mills, who's such a capable volume scorer in moments, bringing back Matt Cleveland, who I'm not sure a lot of people thought going into last year was going to have a second season with the program. Like you mentioned, Darren Green, I think is the piece they were missing last year. That sharpshooter when Anthony Polite wasn't quite filling that void as he has in seasons past. And I think Cameron Fletcher's a really intriguing prospect. And Naheem McLeod. Those are two guys now in their second year in the program who showed their potential in moments. And I think there's reason to think both will take kind of a step forward in year two here.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned pieces because I do think even last year, Florida State had pieces if they were healthy to be able to make the NCAA tournament still. We saw the upside of that particular team the week that they beat Miami, Duke, and then beat Miami again. So we know what they were capable of. Ham had arguably the worst run of injuries he's ever had, he said, even in his career, spanning multiple schools. So Florida State 17-14 last year. I know it really killed a lot of the momentum for the New Bloods because the Noles had really ascended into that top tier of not just the ACC, but the country in terms of programs. And this year was the hope that they would flip it around. And they went out and they put a lot of pieces together. Curt mentioned Darren Green Jr. He's going to be, I'm going to go ahead and be on record, and I'll eat crow if I'm wrong. He's the best shooter Florida State's had under Leonard Hamilton, period, to come to this program under Leonard Hamilton, I'll say. Naheem McLeod showed you some things. He added a ton of muscle. He looks much bigger. Caleb Mills, I think, is finally comfortable in Tallahassee. We know what he can do. His track record and resume says that he knows how to put the ball in the bucket. If Cleveland takes that step forward that a lot of people are hoping and turns into a draft pick for FSU this season, then I think you're cooking with gas, right? And now you're talking about a Seminoles team who can compete for that top 4 or 5 again of the ACC. And Jalen Worley, everybody wanted him out of high school. And he was a borderline 5-star, one of the top-rated 4 stars if you want to use those metrics. He's comfortable. It's his show to run. And he's going to be a big part of this. Cameron Corrin, I think, is a kid that people are going to like a lot, freshman that's really stood out. And we'll have to see if Tom House makes a big difference. But I do think, guys, that this team, if we could talk about it some more, back to what Curt said, has pieces to be able to have Seminole fans optimistic that they can make another run to the big dance. And then once you get there, as we know in the past, it's all up to chalk at that point and see what happens.
I think the word that I used was shorthanded. Yes, not short on talent. There's tons of talent on this roster. The questions I have is how deep can the rotation be? Is it going to be deep enough where you can handle all the expectations on the offensive end and the defensive end? You know, it's one thing for like Notre Dame to run 8 guys out there because they can. They're not expecting as much within their scheme, their system, their flow. How many of these freshmen can you push early? As one of the questions that we kind of asked Stan Jones about is what stage of the development are these guys on? Can you push a freshman a little bit more than scheduled because out of necessity you have to?
And the problem with that to a degree is beyond the guys we've mentioned who are out, they're not going to have the services immediately of Deontay Green. They might not have Deontay Green at all this season. He tore his ACL his senior year of high school, is still working his way back from that, has looked good at moments. I warmed up before the exhibition, but the expectation is he's not going to be available to start the season, and we'll see how long that goes. And along with that, Chandler Jackson, I don't think is a long-term injury. I think Leonard Hamilton was optimistic that he's had a wrist injury that he's been dealing with, but he was optimistic he might be able to make it back. But even then, he's missed a decent chunk of the fall. So where is he at of how much can he give you now, having not practiced a ton in his first fall? So those are 2 other true freshmen who aren't going to be good to go potentially, or definitely aren't going to be probably at full 100% to start the season.
We'll have to also see, guys, how Cam Fletcher fits into the picture for Florida State this season. A lot of hype from him last year coming from Kentucky. And I think he showed you in stretches what makes him such a great prospect. The length, the athleticism, can shoot the 3 as well. You know, he's got the ability from that area. And so maybe Cam takes another step forward in his maturation process.
Yeah, Stan Jones has talked about that a little. I talked to Cam for a feature that's on the Osceola now, actually ran today. He talked pretty candidly about, he said basically till he got to Florida State, he didn't know how to play the real basketball. This is a kid who was a 4-star recruit, was spent his first year at Kentucky, didn't play a ton. But it seems like Florida State really helped in just general basketball IQ, and I think he is very comfortable in the system. And like you said, he's going to be asked to do a lot. Stan Jones talked about he's an even better spot-up shooter, he thinks, or he can kind of be maybe that complementary piece to a Darian Green or a Tom House in that regard. And I think is also, I mean, like you said, we saw it in stretches. He's a guy whose roles increased with these guys they're going to be without. I think he can play anywhere between kind of the 2 and the small ball 5, and I think he might have to play more of that small ball 5 because of the state of their front court depth right now.
It'll be interesting to see how FSU uses that small ball rotation because it has a lot of potential, and I think it's very intriguing as to what FSU can do with that and the lineups they can run out. Curt mentioned the interview with Stan Jones. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this. You can hear it from us, but it's better to hear it from someone who's there every single day, bringing these guys into the program, coaching them up, and he's one of the best in the entire country. Florida State's associate head coach, Stan Jones. Here he is.
We are joined by Florida State men's basketball associate head coach, Stan Jones. Coach, you've been doing this for a while now. What is the feeling this time of year for you? Is it anxiety? Is it excitement? What is the general, just like, you know, like when you're days out from the start of the season this time of year?
Well, it's never anxiety. I mean, that's what you signed up for. I mean, it's got to be a passion for you. So it's probably more of exhilaration. You're looking forward to like the start of any new season, what the possibilities could be. You start kind of daydreaming about where the journey could take you to at the end of it. And so, you know, it has to start with the first game. So a lot of anticipation moving forward here, getting ready for next week.
You look at this team. How much did we've talked to Coach Ham about the Canada trip and you get to do those every few years where those games help. Especially, it feels like this is a team that really needed that with so many new guys and kind of the veterans aren't really veterans by kind of y'all standards.
That really helped because these guys got some reference points. So when we started implementing stuff in fall preseason practices, they had an idea. It wasn't like we had to start from ground zero and start from the very basics without them already having been kind of introduced to all those things. So it's been really helpful for them. It's been helpful to the veteran guys, the small veteran guys that haven't been here very much, but it's helped them get a better voice and because then that's reinforced for them.
You talk about the veterans. I think Coach Ames a few times talked about kind of joking about the second-year veterans because that's
right.
Really a lot of what y'all have this year. Who have you seen from that group really step up and rise to the occasion and the kind of the leadership aspect? The guys like I know Malik Osborne and Anthony Polite, Wyatt Wilkes have had in the years past.
Yeah, sometimes all that becomes kind of observable wannabes. And one thing we try to do in our program in this culture in the locker room, we try to do is we want everybody to be a leader. So we practice everybody's voice being heard. We practice enthusiasm. We practice connectivity. And so it's been good for a lot of guys. The Canada trip, again, was good for that, too, because we try to mix up who's breaking huddles, who's answering questions, and try to make sure everybody feels comfortable that I can talk to you, you can talk to me, and we can solve problems whenever adversity hits us. So it's been good for all of them. I've seen a step in the right direction in those guys in particular, but also seen some confidence in the incoming guys that they realize that they don't have to just play second fiddle and they're not allowed to share when they see something as a leadership role. I think that's what allows you to have a good team.
I think Matthew Cleveland was one of those guys who kind of had a choice to make after kind of the first season. I don't know if his idea coming in of how long he'd be in college, but I guess what were the conversations like with you or the staff with him, and I guess what kind of eventually from his conversations with you went into kind of him wanting to come back for that second season?
I don't know if it ever got down to just to sit down and saying, do you want to come back or not? I mean, Matt's an incredibly intelligent person. He's an intelligent basketball player as well as that. So he understands that there's a business to the game of basketball, and his family understands that, dad being a good business person as well. So it wasn't about want to or not want to. It's what was best for his development. And Matt sees things. He listens to things. He maybe overanalyzes at times, but he's gotten better now. He's starting to take things on a little bit more trust level instead of trying to analyze it all the way down to its finest minute points before he realizes it's okay to do it. And you can just see him being at a much more peace with himself, where he knows what his strengths are. He understands what his weaknesses are. He understands college basketball now. The comparison game is a lot of freshmen do come in there reading because they've come off so much attention they get as high school recruits with all the different things that go out there with rankings and this versus that and all-star games and stuff. And you know this guy from this camp, you know this guy from this AAU tournament, and I think he now realizes he's comfortable as a college basketball player, and I think you're going to see his productivity be more consistent because of that comfortability.
I know he missed some time, didn't play on the Canada trip, but how have you seen him really make the effort to round out his game? I think you saw the potential last year, but some areas where he could really become that lethal all-around player. He became very open to improving some things in his shooting mechanics. You can see that, obviously, just watching him shoot. I think you'll see that as the season plays out, as he gets comfortable and now adding that as part of his game more consistently, that he'll have confidence in that. The one thing I'm challenging him to do, and I think our staff's challenging him to do, is because he is very bright, of not just being a technical defender, but being a little bit more kind of a calculated risk defender and being more of an impact guy, making plays on the defensive end of the floor in the passing lanes as a secondary shot blocker with his length and athleticism, taking people out and try to ISO him in situations with his length and his lateral quickness. So with that, I think he needs to become a better rebounder on both ends of the floor because he has a natural nose for going to get offensive rebounds, but he doesn't consistently go do it. And he needs to become a better defensive rebounder in terms of not just he's a good blockout guy, but there's two parts to rebound. You have to block out and you have to go get it. And we need him to be a guy that uses his wingspan and stuff to go get tough rebounds in traffic for us this year.
Cam Fletcher is a guy whose role will probably evolve because of factors, beyond everybody's control with the injury and the suspension for Baba. But how can Cam be impactful as a versatile 4 or 5, and regardless of whatever role you might put him out there?
Well, he's really improved as a stationary spot-up shooter in the offseason. His understanding of the system is much further along and more confident in. You know, Cam's the kind of guy that almost becomes his own problem. He tries to play so hard that sometimes he puts himself in bad spots because he overruns things, he over tries on things, and kind of puts the team on an island a little bit because he's trying so hard that he'll give up bigger gaps or he'll run through gaps that he shouldn't be running through, and allowing our defensive schemes to kind of get broken down. Not because he doesn't know what he's doing, it's because he's overdoing it. And so hopefully maturity and understanding is going to allow him to now use that athleticism and energy to make the play and make the right play instead of just making a gamble play. And if he does that, he can be a really impactful player on the defensive end and the offensive end. He'll get that way too. He'll get a little he'll drive the ball too deep, 1 or 2 dribbles too deep, or he'll try to make the pass too early before the defense is committed to him enough. So hopefully all those things will become something now that with now being his 3rd year in college basketball and 2nd year with us, that he'll make those plays.
I'm curious about Darren Green Jr., because probably a guy you knew about in high school, but when he goes in the transfer portal and you say, I remember that guy, and you've also played him, unfortunately, that December 2020.
I remember that more than high school.
That result wasn't very favorable, right? But you know he's a lights-out shooter and what he can bring. I mean, immediately, are you thinking that's a guy who could fit? How does it come together?
You see the consistent production he had at UCF. You obviously got to look at he's going to be able to produce in some capacity for our team because he's done that at UCF. He's been a double-digit scorer, hit over 200 threes in his career so far, played a lot of minutes. And you can see that when he plays, even when he's been getting an understanding of our system, you can see him just make basketball plays because of experience in Canada and in the preseason because he's been in a whole lot of basketball's basketball. Everybody has some little different tweaks they do on things, but it's still the same dribble, pass, defend, rebound, run the floor, get back on defense. It's still that simple of a game, and you can see him making those plays just because of experience. And so we're excited about him being able to bring that experience on the floor and make some plays for us as a veteran player with the amount of minutes he's played so far.
I know if you had to kind of Darren and I guess Caleb Mills would probably be the veterans if you're talking guys who played college basketball, not all of it here. How have you seen Caleb kind of entering now year 2 here? I guess he's coming up on 2 full years here. He got here January, the COVID year. How have you seen him rise to the challenge of kind of maybe stepping into an even bigger role now?
Well, people forget that Caleb was voted a preseason possible player of the year in the American Conference, and then whatever the situation was there at his previous school, and him coming here, he really missed basically a whole year of basketball because at the end of his tenure at Houston, he had a really bad issue with COVID. Then he came here, the COVID protocols of getting on the floor never allowed him to practice, and we went into bubble in postseason, so he wasn't allowed to travel at that point when he was healthy enough to work out. So he really wasn't even getting practice or any kind of competitive reps as a scout team guy or anything in practice when he was out. So when you go through that and you had those kind of expectations before, you tend to overly put pressure on yourself when you come back into play. Everybody thinks, all the people out there that play church league and the YMCA, they think because you show up on Thursday night to play and you go get your sweat and your run in, that basketball's a game. It just translates that way. And it's not at our level. And Caleb, you got to get your timing back. You got to get your rhythm back. Then you're learning a different system than what you played in terms of play call sheets and defensive schemes than what he played at his previous school. Then he puts those expectations on his back. That becomes a lot of weight to carry. I think you can see that a little bit. He was putting so much demands on himself last year that he never played with any joy, and sometimes not with any personality because of not playing with any joy. And as you look at him this year, and I've watched him evolve during the summer, you see him more comfortable in his skin wearing garnet and gold, more comfortable with his interactions with his teammates and the coaching staff. And you see him playing with a much more poise and confidence about himself because he now knows he's at Florida State. He actually finished his degree at Florida State. So there's just a level of comfortability for him that's, I think, is going to allow you to see him see more consistent play out of him this year than we saw last year. Even though he made some spectacular plays, and the Louisville game, he had a spectacular performance and production in that game. I think you're going to see that more consistently this year just because of his maturation.
How valuable is a guy like Caleb for someone like Jalen Worley coming back to year 2 now? And I guess how much more do you think Jalen can be that point guard run, maybe even rotating in with mostly first-team guys, or maybe penetrate the starting lineup as a sophomore now?
You got to help him. Just a dumb ball coach. You brought Caleb and Jalen up.
How much can Caleb help Jalen? Is more as a guy who's played point guard, and just along with that, Jalen coming into year 2 now.
Caleb hadn't been a lead. We kind of call those guys lead guards as much in his career until recently, since we had Chandler Jackson go down with a thumb surgery and the same kind of thing that Cam Fletcher had in the last year, and so Caleb's kind of got opportunity to be in. I think it's been good for Caleb's development to do that. So I think that they help each other, but there's not really anything specifically that they're doing because of any kind of experience at that position that's helping each other, other than taking what the coaching staff teaches them and then being able to push each other because they're both good players and good ball handlers and low turnover guys.
And just, I guess, Jalen, just coming into year 2, like with Matt, how valuable was the year and the role he had in year 1 now coming into year 2?
Again, Jalen's a guy I think you're going to see a big second-year jump this year. Last year, he's another one of these kids when they come in with these expectations because of the recruiting process and the hype we put now on high school kids in our sport, more so probably than any other sport, with getting them getting TV games and them getting all-star games and going through all that stuff, and so many kids with the one and done and putting their name in the draft and that kind of stuff. You see the anxiety out of them that you really shouldn't be seeing at this point in their lives, but it's real. And so I think Jalen played with some unrealistic expectations at times last year as a freshman coming in that he put on himself, not that we put on him. And but again, when he goes through that, he still had a 2-to-1 assist turnover ratio last year, and had some the minutes he got at the end of the year after Polite and Caleb and those guys got hurt, and Ray went down for a couple games. I think that's all valuable for him, and I think he sees a bigger picture this year, and I think he sees, again, I'm in college basketball, I got to get a body of work done, and so I don't think he has that stress on himself that he played with last year.
I know the big men are your personal, always the pet project of always trying to work with them. How have you challenged Naheem this offseason? Obviously, some circumstances he may have an even bigger role than you thought he would coming into the year. How have you challenged him coming off of year 1?
If you ask Naheem, he'd probably say, what day do I not challenge him in every part of his life? Because he's a guy that I've known since he was a junior in high school. I've known his high school. I recruited a really good player for us at the University of Miami named John Salmons way back in the day, and the same coach is still there. And so I feel a lot of expectations on myself to try to help Naheem become the best version of himself. So Naheem's a guy that came from a very difficult background when he was a kid. Some people have really come into his life during those middle school and high school years that really helped him be able to change his life. And so he's just now, again, feeling, when you're 7'4", you don't always feel normal of everybody else. So you start trying to fit in with like you're a 6'1" guy, and so he's just now getting comfortable in his 7'4" height. He's just getting comfortable because he missed some elementary stuff learning. Where, not that he's not a smart guy, he's very smart, but he's had to learn how to learn some more because he didn't get those experiences when he was in the little younger stages of his life. So there's so much more of a ceiling left for Naheem McLeod, and I think you see it every day in practice. We have, and I think our fans are going to see it every day in the game as he gets more playing time and he gets more understanding of the role and the expectations that are on him, and he embraces those. I think I'm excited to see what he'll do this year.
With the injury to Jalen Gainey, suspension of Bob and Miller, you may have to bring on some freshmen a little faster than you might want their development to be expedited. I guess maybe Cam Gorin is one of those guys, but what's the ability to push them versus you don't want to push them a little too hard, too fast as the season starts here?
I think all of coaching is pushing. I mean, you got to try to get them to get not just to their potential, but our goal is to try to get them beyond their potential. So probably the Jalen Gainey loss is been a bigger factor is the situation we've been going through here lately, because Jalen was a guy that played a lot of college basketball, had productive basketball and accolades achieved as a basketball player, and he played really hard, and he was incredibly smart, and guys were kind of feeding off of that in the summer. And so I'm really disappointed for him, because he was really starting to feel real comfortable. And it was good for Naheem, it was good for Cam Corian to have that kind of veteran guy that was kind of saying, do it this way, do it that way, and watch me. So now they're having to kind of figure out how to watch each other now with Jalen not in the mix. So that's going to be a spot that we're going to need a Cam Corian. And I think he comes from a basketball pedigree. He played the team that ranked #1 in the high school ranks last year on a really good team, a lot of Division I players. His father was a Division I basketball player on a really good team. His father played in the Final Four at Georgia back in the 1980s. So they talk basketball a lot. So I think you're going to see his improvement escalate pretty quickly, just because of the background he's coming to us from, on being a basketball family and being from a really good basketball program. You're going to see him fill a really good role for us.
You talked about Jalen Gainey, and I know it may not be the same if he's not able to do, like you said, the watch me do this. How valuable can he still be talking to those guys, even if he's not maybe able to show them in a practice setting?
Yeah, I talked to Jalen about this the other day, because it was really good for Michael Ojo when Michael was here, and he tore his meniscus and had to get it surgically sewed back together. And he started doing that. And Jalen's not at any point where he can do that right now, because he's not. When he first hurt his knee, we was at the start of practice, so he's been going through all the therapy to get prepared for the surgery. Now he's been in the surgery, and getting around and not being weight bearing totally on stuff he can't get around, but to the minimal function. But just being at the game with Newberry the other night, he wanted to be in the arena. We made sure he got there, and you could see him, even though he was despondent a little bit because he wants to play, he wanted to be there and talk to his teammates. And I think that was good for the whole squad and good for the coaches too, because Jalen's going to contribute next year and be good for us. So we'll go from there with it.
And then with Baba and his situation, how do you balance him? I mean, how do you? I mean, do you think will it not be hard to keep him invested? I'm sure he's going to be invested even while not being able to be out there. And how do you balance using him at practice versus wanting to keep him ready for when those 16 games are up, versus not wanting to take time away from guys who can play now?
We're not going to have him standing on the side regardless. I mean, that's kind of a question that not really even needs to be discussed too much, because he's got to be prepared to know our system, because he didn't have a summer with us. He's also got to stay in shape. He's got to use his time to continue to get to know himself as an individual player, and we're going to do that. And our job is to keep him focused and in the right frame of mind to get better every day. He's got to be like everybody on the team. He's got to get at least 1% better every day. I mean, that's the minimum we try. You got to be better than you were yesterday. Hopefully we make more than 1%, but you got to be better. So he's got to be a guy that if he runs some scout team, which we'll start doing that here in the next couple of days when we get ready for the game week next week. But even with that, he's still got to be learning, and so he's going to get a lot of reps. Game days, he'll get a game day workouts. We've done with guys all the way back to Al Thornton when he was a redshirt freshman here. That we're not going to let those be days where they're bored and they're not getting better. So we've been with guys before, and we've had success with this before, and we're expecting big success for him as we go through this process.
I think a good one as we wrap up here is just sitting in your office. We've got photos of guys who played here. They're in the NBA, overseas. You've kept up with a lot of them. Maybe just a couple quick updates from you on what guys are doing in pro ball as they've kind of moved on from Florida State.
Well, obviously you start with the NBA guys. I mean, right now we have, counting two-way contracts, which are now NBA contracts. I mean, we got 9 guys on NBA contracts this year, playing various roles from being starters and averaging 20 points a game. Devin Vassell's off to an incredible start in his 3rd year. Jonathan Isaac's on the verge of being back. We were able to see him recently. We were down in Orlando for a trip. Guys are fulfilling different roles. Patrick Williams starting with the Chicago Bulls. Scotty Barnes is continuing to build on his fabulous rookie of the year season he had last year. And guys are having good opportunities like Fiondu Kabengele with the Celtics on a 2-way deal, Trent Forrest with the Hawks. Even John Butler now has a 2-way contract with the Portland Trail Blazers and seems to be in a really good place. after a difficult transition period for him. So we're excited about those guys. There's some guys playing really good overseas, and I don't think we cover, and chastise you guys a little bit, I don't think we cover our guys when they leave here because we don't really know in our little world here in Tallahassee that there's huge basketball leagues everywhere in the world. Chris Singleton has been part of 3 of the last 4 EuroLeague championships, and we don't really talk about that from the Florida State family perspective, and we should. He's in back-to-back. He's been playing, won the Euro League, which is the second best league in the world, last 2 years. We got other guys playing. Xavier Rattan-Mays has had an incredible 2 years down in Australia playing in the NBL, which is probably the next best league in the country. David Nichols has had a great run in his career since he left us. So there's a lot of guys doing some really neat things, but there's also some guys transitioning out of their playing career that are still doing great things in basketball. I mean, Luke Laux is now sitting on the front of the bench for the Sacramento Kings. Davis Dulkes is the player development coach for the Sacramento Kings. Michael Joyner's coaching with the Memphis Grizzlies. Isaiah Swan just took a job working for the G League team for the Utah Jazz in player development. So there's a lot of stories around the Leonard Hamilton era at Florida State that hopefully during the course of this year we can highlight some of those a little bit more and let people know that there's a lot of success going on from our guys leaving our program, and that's where we get our joy in program, is seeing those guys win here but win bigger when they get on their own.
Good stuff from Stan. Appreciate him joining Tuck Talk. It's something you can expect regularly, is having guys within the program, whether it be the coaching staff or players, join us on this pod to hear it from themselves. All right. You guys, what were your takeaways from your sit down with Stan? It seems like he's realistic about this team, but he is optimistic, and they like what they have in that Tucker Center.
Yeah, I think he's seen enough in the last couple of months to see how the pieces can form together. You can't discount the August trip to Canada. I think that's huge from a developmental standpoint. Even though Gainey was playing at that point, you kind of saw how the pieces fit with Jalen Gainey. Now he's still had some time to figure out different practices, how the rotations figure out. Like you, I'm really curious about Cam Fletcher. I think that's a versatile piece where it's not just points. It's going to be rebounds, defense, energy. I think the big points to this team are not having a Caleb Mills, not having a Matthew Cleveland carry too much of the load. You've got to find other guys. Darren Green is a big piece, like we talked about, to stretch the defenses out. The inside guys, can Naheem McLeod take a big step? Because he's got to be more of a rebounder, more of a shot blocker, a little bit more of a scorer, hopefully a little bit of a better free throw shooter. Yeah. But they've got to have guys get more comfortable in their roles.
What can Jalen Ward give you offensively is, I think, an interesting thing, too, because you saw it in short spurts, but not too often last season. He was, for the most part, it seemed like a guy who was out there for defense, and I don't know if it was lack of comfort. I don't know if it was what it was, maybe just wanting to help others out, but he wasn't a huge offensive piece, and I think we've seen he can be capable of doing that. I mean, it's an interesting offseason because there are so many guys who you have reason to be encouraged by, and I think Stan hit on a lot of that, and it's about seeing how that plays out over this first few months really of the season before they're at full strength getting Baba back, even if they're probably not getting Jalen Gainey back.
Yeah, and Gainey out for the year. They've got him for another year, though. I think they're going to also apply for yet another waiver to see if they can't give him an additional year if he would so choose it. But that's a big loss, guys, and we got to talk about that. Gainey was an emotional leader for that team. I was told by some of the players that he was the most athletic player on the team at his size, and they really thought that they had high hopes for him. And that's going to be a big loss for FSU because he's an older kid that came from Brown. You know, he's the Ivy League, and you know that means he's got makeup to be able to even be accepted into an Ivy League. So it's going to hurt, and I think we can't undersell that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Stan talked about in that interview. I mean, I know he was a guy who, with those younger bigs, with the Cameron Corrins, with the Naheem McLeods, with even the Deontay Green, if he's not all the way back yet, he was a guy who was big on talking them through things and also showing them things. And obviously now in this state in his recovery, I know he's not too long past surgery. He's not in a place where he can show them much of anything, but I think he can still be valuable to a point. There's obviously going to be some frustration there of coming here and not getting to play at all in his first season, but I think he can still be a valuable bench piece talking to those guys and at practice. But no, yeah, I mean, no doubt, it's hard to downplay. It was already going to be a bit of a tough situation, and the half-season suspension of Baba Miller really tests that even further.
Let's talk about Baba. Bob. That's tough. I mean, 16 games seems unfair. I was told that originally it might have even been a season-long thing. At first, and FSU had to fight it back down to 16, which I still think is severe. And echo my thoughts here, Bob, if you might, or parlay it into your ideas, because it just doesn't seem consistent with the NCAA punishing people for different types of infractions that don't make sense. Baba paid it back. It was when he was 16, I believe, or 17 years old before FSU got involved. And there's just not a lot of education for international prospects on the rules with the NCAA. So for me, this just doesn't make sense. And the punishment is so severe. You've got national writers and national media who don't have any skin in the game with FSU. They're besides themselves. They just cannot believe that the NCAA would hand this type of punishment down to Baba.
And some people like Jay Billis and Vic Vitale are kind of taking that on Twitter, and they're still being active in speaking out against the NCAA. Okay, it's a bad rule that is on the books. It does start with a 1-year suspension. Florida State appealed. There are no more appeals. It's over. It's going to be a half season. In this day and age of NIL, it doesn't make any sense. It's penalizing a prospect for something that if he was a current student athlete would be essentially in a perfectly fine realm of, yeah, you're taking on an opportunity to do something within your basketball career. This was a lack of understanding about the NCAA rules. Before you even think you're going to be a college basketball prospect, you are living in another country. I'm not sure how you can expect somebody living in Spain, anywhere in Europe, around the world, to understand NCAA rules as a 16-year-old. I can't understand it, and I've got many more than 16 years under my belt. It's a really bad rule that will probably not be transformed or reformed anytime soon because it's just so low on the list, but it needs to for the betterment of the game as far as how international players can transition to over to the U.S. game.
It seems like a rule in place largely for the handlers that can sometimes be attached to these international prospects. And maybe that was the case at that point in the recruitment, but it was before any school was involved. It was before he knew he wanted to play college basketball. I mean, it does not make sense to me that Baba got 16 games, and James Wiseman got 12 games for Penny Hardaway paying his mom directly. And I'm not sure that money was reimbursed. Like that, the duality of it all does not make sense to me.
And it's tough to find comparables too. Like we've asked people, and we can probably say who they are on the record or not, but you can just take our word for it. We've asked people, we've done some research, we've tried to look at past cases. I've asked some basketball writers, what's comparable to this? We're not finding anything that's truly an apple-to-apple comparison. We look at other penalties, and you say, what did James Wiseman get at Memphis? What did the guy I was telling you about, Omar Yurtseven at NC State? Yep. Yurtseven's suspension was like 9 games back in 2016. Wiseman's was like 11 or 12.
It was 12.
Now we're talking about 16. So again, these are various penalties, different in nature, but this one for Baba is much more severe when he seemingly, in our view, committed less of a quote unquote crime, because it's truly not, it wasn't a recruiting enticement whatsoever. It's really just a bad rule. It's on the books. It needs to be modified pretty soon, even though it's not going to be.
You say that. It feels like if there is enough public scrutiny, it could be modified. It could become almost a Baba Miller rule, which is unfortunate that Florida State players going to have to be the example that gets a rule changed. Maybe it does bring about some good change. I think we can all hope at the very least that's the case because, it's not the intention of the rule. They are enacting a rule that, although I guess technically applies, this was not what it was intended to enforce.
I think too, though, if you say that you're in the best interest of the athletes, of the student athletes, then as a governing body, you've got to serve those student athletes and not punish them. I think the NCAA good news missed the mark completely.
If there is any good news, I hear Baba's remained pretty upbeat. I hear he's kind of not changed at all around the facility in the days since the news. I think he tweeted not too long after it came down. I think later that day, like, I don't remember it word for word. It was basically like, well, that's tough, but y'all wait for my time, or like my time's still coming. Or he, I think, will make the impact to be the type of player that we thought we'd see in the second half of the season. Like I said, you hope Florida State's not in too big a hole where kind of they've damaged the resume too much. And the really unfortunate thing is it's entirely possible this guy's a one and done. This is the 1 year Florida State fans are going to get to watch him in the Garnet and Gold, and half of that's being taken away.
Yeah, and on a bigger picture for him, if he had known he was going to be suspended 16 games, does he make a decision to stay in Europe, continue to train with Real Madrid, and get taken in the NBA draft from that route? It stinks altogether. NCAA dropped the ball. It's not what's the right word? It's not objectively speaking subjectively speaking. I mean, it's just it's completely a bad rule. That's it. Simple as that. I think NCAA, even people inside their buildings are saying things like, we messed this up. So anyway, I think let's move on to bigger picture for the season. ACC as a whole, the national scene for Florida State, what people's expectations are for the Seminoles from a broader perspective. And for that, I think no better than a good friend of ours here at Tuck Talk, Dalen Cuff of the ACC Network. He'll be analyzing the sport all season long on ESPN, and he was kind enough to join us to talk about a variety of things.
Dalen, first off, man, appreciate you joining me. Busy schedule. I know you're in the middle of soccer season, and turning the page to hoops should be a lot of fun, though, with the ACC this season. It could be a year in which the league rebounds and has more depth throughout the league, even though the top half has still been pretty good over the years.
Yeah, man. I hope we're not supposed to root this business, but when the ACC is a conference that is the best or one of the best in the country, college basketball benefits, and that's kind of my purview is the whole landscape of things. And I want this league to kind of represent its traditions. Unfortunately, in recent years, it's not been that case really since 2019-20 season. It's been down relative to its own success. I mean, bear in mind, in 18-19 Ariya, there was 3 number 1 seeds. Virginia was the national champion. Zion and RJ were comets. Like it was a pretty amazing year. But since then, it's been struggle to get multiple teams in a tournament. Now, granted, they really performed last year. 3 Elite 8 teams. I think it was 14-6 overall was the record. The tournament that was great for the teams that got there. But I think we expect more quality in the middle of the pack and the back of the pack, even in the ACC. I think this year should be a little bit better in that middle of the pack. And we'll see the top end quality as well with Carolina bringing everybody back. And Duke's got 11 new faces. And of course, John Shire there instead of Coach K. So there's no shortage of storylines within the ACC this year, no doubt.
Let's start at the top, Dalen, because, UNC Duke, they moved the needle, right? Nationally, within the league, whenever you see the blue of Carolina, of Duke, you know that you expect a pretty good basketball team. But it should be interesting. UNC last year, until the run they made in the NCAA tournament, it wasn't like they were one of the best teams in the country. They were working their way in under Coach Davis. And then Duke, of course, you mentioned it, a lot of new faces. And they've got a new head coach. John Shire is not Coach K, but he seems to be a pretty smart mind. What do we expect from UNC? Can they repeat the success that they had last year with that tournament run? And is Duke going to be the same Duke Blue Devils that we've been accustomed to seeing?
It's a lot there. So let's start with North Carolina first and foremost. And to your point, I mean, in the middle of February, they got blasted by Pitt at home. At that point in time, they were 1-7 against quad 1 teams. And they lost games to Purdue, to Kentucky, to Wake Forest, or Miami, where they were non-competitive. Like they got shellacked. So they were firmly on the bubble in the middle of February. They continued to play well, winning that game at Duke, solidified things for them, put them in the tournament. And then they really they hit their stride. After that Pitt game, they started to kind of turn things around. You saw a level of commitment on the defensive end that was better. You saw Brady Manick continue to make shots. Armando Bacot dominate games. Their 2 guards, Caleb Love and RJ Davis, play at an elite level. Losing Manick is critical. Like that guy was an absolute driller, a very good positional defender, good post defender, good rebounder. They bring in Pete Nance, a transfer from Northwestern. I saw North Carolina practice a couple weeks ago, and I liked what I saw, but you did still see the depth is going to be an issue. They played about 5.5 guys last year. Once you've got to have freshmen like Jalen Washington coming off a knee injury. He could be a pretty special player, but he's still getting back to full health. Seth Trimble is a freshman. They've got a wing player as well. Trimble's more point guard. They need some of these young guys to be able to step up. They need Nance, who's not going to be Manick, but can guard 1 through 5, is a very good versatile defender, can knock down a 3, can grade a little bit. He's got to be really good. And those freshmen have to help, because when Caleb and RJ aren't on the court, that's a He's going to stride offensively. We know what he can do defending and rebounding, but they're going to need other guys to support that team. They got hot at the right time. They have all those guys come back. They have the belief, they have the talent. They also, from talking to them, have a chip on their shoulder. Bear in mind, they're up double digits against Kansas and then going into the second half and they lose that game in heartbreaking fashion. So that they're carrying that loss with them. Like they were proud of what they did, but they know they maybe left a national championship hanging out there. So they're going to have to be better. They're going to have to be good. They're going to have to find some more depth because I didn't have that last year. On the Duke side of things, also saw them practice. They're going through getting guys healthy, particularly some of their young stud freshmen. So I don't have as good a sense of that team because when those guys don't play and you don't see them in person, you don't really know. And I know John Shire likes his team. He knows that the challenge of 11 new faces, and he knows the challenge of his role. I mean, you're replacing, in my mind, the greatest coach in college basketball history, and Mike Krzyzewski. What does that mean? How does he put his stamp on the program? How does he open himself up to the media and to others to kind of see how he's doing things differently? How does he connect with his players now that he slides over those 18 inches from associate head coach to head coach? I've talked to so many guys that have made that journey, that 18-inch journey area. It ain't easy, man. It's not a simple thing to do that, and the whole world can seem different. So how he handles all that, how he handles adversity. The good thing is they've got a couple easy games. I have a chance of calling one of them against USC Upstate, I think on the Friday the 11th, before they play Kansas and the State Farm Champions Classic, which usually that's the first game of the season. So he's not thrown right to the wolves. Get a couple games to get his feet under him, get his team's feet under him, kind of see what he's got, see what his rotation is. Because 11 new faces, you got transfers, you got freshmen, you got guys, other than Jeremy Roach, who I'll tell you what, Jeremy Roach looked fantastic. Like he looked like an absolute killer out there. So I'm excited to see that young man play. But I will say the rest of the league, the rest of the team, there's still just a bunch of question marks. So we'll have to find out November 7th what they look like and what Shire looks like running the program.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned it's not the easiest transition. And the microscope's on you when you're at Duke. That pressure is unlike really any in college basketball because of just the proud tradition that program has had. And we'll have to see. Coach K was so good, Dalen, at managing personalities and not just having a bunch of five-star players, but to be able to craft an environment and an atmosphere for all those players to be successful. So I think that's going to be, can Shire do the same things that Coach K had decades of experience doing? But then you got North Carolina and we saw UCLA a couple seasons ago. They make a deep run and it only gave that group confidence all coming back the next year. So I think we all feel pretty good about the Tar Heels being one of the top teams, not just in the ACC, but in the country. All right. Well, this is Florida State.
You made a good point there because, UCLA had all those guys coming back from a Final Four team that was similarly, they had to play in the first four. They make that run to the Final Four, but they had a lot of guys come back. They didn't have a lot of dudes, not a lot of pros, not a lot of dudes. And they had some injury issues. And that team really struggled last year. And they struggled under the weight of expectations. They struggled under injuries. And they struggled of coming up short of where they thought they should have been. And I think that sometimes I think this North Carolina team is different, but just because you made that run last year, each year is different, each year is unique and can present its own challenges. And I think they will be prepared by that from Hubert Davis, but we shouldn't just expect that it's going to be smooth sailing because it never is.
For sure. And so now we look at the middle of the ACC, Dalen. I think that's where Florida State kind of falls in towards that middle top. We won't say top five, maybe right in that 4 to 7 range, where if things break the right way, they could compete for that upper quadrant of the ACC. But an FSU basketball podcast from a national perspective, what are the storylines that you're looking for from Leonard Hamilton's Seminoles?
It's an interesting team. I love Leonard. I'm one of his biggest fans, what he's done personally, professionally, his program, and the success they've had. It was hard to watch them last year, just go through that bludgeoning of injuries and illness. And just, it was crazy. And it was hard to watch. That said, this is rare to see his team that he doesn't have a lot of guys anybody that's been there for 3 years, like that know this system and are comfortable in his system and understand exactly what the expectations are from them. Now, Matthew Cleveland comes back, 6th man of the year. That's important. Caleb Mills is going to be one of the best pure scorers in the conference and back to where in the country. Remember, the year before he came to Florida State, he was in 2020, I should say, he was the American Athletic Player of the Year. And at Houston, he could really go, man. I'm excited to see him hopefully in full health and talking to him at media days. I think he has a lot of confidence about him right now and a desire to kind of prove not people wrong, but that last year was a mistake. Last year was not the way it was supposed to be. Given all the injuries, if you didn't pay attention to that, you just thought they weren't any good. That's not the case. And I think it's interesting to see how all these guys gel, and if they can get back to being a team. I think it's really important for this team in particular, with a lack of maybe obvious really good guard player, obvious wing scoring outside of those couple guys, is to say they need to get back to defending the way they had in years past, where they're junkyard dogs, turning you over, scoring off their defense. I mean, that's when they were at their best a couple years ago, when they had high turnover rate. They would get out in transition and come at you in waves with length and athleticism. And if they can get back to that, that'll help mitigate some of the lack of experience they have on the offensive end, but also lack of experience can affect you defensively too. So I'm interested to see how Leonard puts that all together and kind of makes those guys go. I'm really interested to see Baba Miller, the European player that was playing at Real Madrid, and played in Eurobasket, which is the best league in the world outside of the NBA. So that young man's got a lot of really good experience. And that freshman class is supposed to be pretty highly touted, a lot of talent overall. So I'm interested to see how they come into the fold, but Miller in particular, how he can go and what he can do as a real versatile big.
Well, Dalen, unfortunately, we have to wait 16 games to see Baba Miller play because the NCAA came down with a hammer on $3,000 when he was 15 years old. And paid it, and he paid it back. It blows my mind the level of inconsistency the NCAA has with punishments, and it just down here in Tallahassee right now, Dalen, it's there's a lot of anger towards the NCAA and the way that they've tried to deal with this situation. It came out of nowhere. It came out of left field. In Florida State now too, when you add that to Jalen Gainey being out for the season with a torn ACL, he was going to be an impact transfer from Brown and your neck of the woods, right in the Ivy League. Like he was.
He's a kid that could play at this level. I mean, the long, bouncy athlete. He wasn't going to score for you much, but he's going to protect the rim. Got to get a lot of deflections and be able to rebound the ball very well and help ignite the break. So I thought he would be somebody that could help them, which is a bummer. And the stuff with Baba, it's how the NCAA adjudicates anything right now. We just saw how they brought down the Louisville penalties. Nothing makes any sense, man. And that's just become par for the course. Like there's no rhyme or reason for it. There's no rationale for it. How Rick Pitino is not at all penalized for what happened at Louisville and gets to be in Iona, and they keep winning and running that program in the right direction. Good for Iona. Don't understand how that stuff works, where other assistant coaches get show cause penalties for 2 years. It's just the NCAA should not be in the business of dealing with it, like creating these rules and adjudicating them in a way that's so inequitable and makes so little sense. But they've been doing it for so long. But the backlash is fully there. The question is, what will the NCAA look like going forward in the years to come? I hope it changes drastically, and I hope they no longer are kind of administering these bizarre rules and regulations that make no sense. Would be beneficial for all of us, and especially the people they always want to protect, the student athletes.
They say that, right, Dalen? Like they say that's their best interest, and sadly for Baba, a good kid, who Florida State wasn't even recruiting him when this violation apparently occurred. And it's tough, and that's just how it goes. But we'll have to see how this ACC schedule plays out for FSU. How important, in your opinion, Dalen, is it for a team like Florida State to be able to get back to full strength, just for the overall perception of the ACC?
It's important because, bear in mind, dude, they've been one of the best programs in the conference. It's been them and Virginia the last 6 years, and UNC have been the best in terms of the regular season. Duke's had some tough regular season years in that run in terms of winning titles in the conference and winning games in the conference. Those three programs have been the best. So it's important for them to get back to their level. It's important for UVA to return to their level. It's important I don't think it's going to happen, but Syracuse is kind of perpetually kind of fallen off. That's disconcerting. So a lot of teams that need to carry weight for the league have to carry weight for the league. And what they got to do early on, you got to win these non-conference games, man. Because when you don't, it puts your metrics behind the eight ball. And then when you cannibalize yourselves in ACC play, they don't look like good wins. And teams do improve through the year. But if you don't win games in November and December against other Power 5 teams, you're setting the league up for a tough spot. And that's where Florida State's in a tough spot to start. When you have all these new pieces or young guys or inexperienced guys being asked a lot of early on, it's hard to win basketball games. So it'll be really important to see. It'll really be interesting to see how they start the season versus a team like UVA that's got all 5 starters coming back. Will they be able to start, kind of pick up where they left off as they ran late and had a good run late, got themselves in the NIT? But the conference needs some of those teams, and particularly those two teams, to perform at the level that we expect of them. Hopefully Miami can stay close to where they were last year. You bring in Nigel Pack from Kansas State, an all Big 12 player, to pair with Isaiah Wong. They're going to be small, but they got a lot of guards that can really go, similar to last year, but even smaller, which is kind of crazy. So if you have those teams, that they have Miami last year, Florida State, Virginia, like they have in the past, along with Carolina and Duke, Virginia Tech, you're starting to build out a group that can have 6, 7, 8 teams in the tournament. I'm not sure we're going to have that yet. That's the weird part about this year, about this modern college basketball. There's so much turnover. Even a lot of coaches don't know what they have till they really have it. Now, that said, NIL this year started to actually have effect in keeping some guys here. Armando Bacot being one in this league, Oscar Tshiebwe in Kentucky, the National Player of the Year, Drew Timme, a lot of the bigs that don't fit in the NBA staying here. Some good guards staying here because they can make money for NIL. So doing what that program was intended to do is to kind of give guys an opportunity to make money off their platform in college, may have a good effect on college basketball this year and hopefully going forward. But this year may be the first year we see more guys stay that would have left and hopefully improve the product and hopefully improve some teams to have more consistent and more knowns early on in the season.
Dalen, before I let you go, give me one team that you feel like is being slept on in the ACC this season.
Well, I've answered this question other places, and I do like my answer had been Florida State because I just trust in what Leonard's got, and I do think they could put together a recipe to be good. But to give you somebody else, I think it is Virginia Tech. I think you've got, Virginia's getting a lot of love because all those guys from back. But Tech brought in some key transfers, have some younger guys, have some guys that have had some success. Obviously, Justin Mutz is one of the most versatile players in the conference. Hunter Couture, one of the best shooters, really working on putting the ball on the deck and creating more off the bounce for himself because we know if he's open with his feet set from 25 feet in, that thing's probably going in. So I like Mike Young obviously a lot. I think he's an outstanding coach and got a lot of some respect and awareness last year after they made that run to the ACC championship and won it. So I think Virginia Tech is a team that could be interesting, but similar to last year's team, may take them a while to build into it. Maybe they won't be as bad as they were early on when they were really bad through ACC play and non-conference play before they got in a run. But I do think that's a team that could be good this year. Could be real interesting. Maybe not to contend for the league, but have a good league season, get themselves in a tournament, and because of the way they play, be a problem for some teams.
Cool. November 7th. It'll be a lot of fun. Dalen, what's on your schedule coming up? Let fans know where they can find you.
Calling the ACC men's soccer tournament Sunday, 2:00 Eastern, ACC Network. We'll be doing it next week. The final is the 13th down in Raleigh, North Carolina, down that area. I also call the Duke Hoops game, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, November 11th. And then, of course, throughout Feast Week, I'll be on ESPN, ESPN2, wherever they need me in that studio. I'll be sitting there. I'm talking hoops. Probably while a lot of you eat turkey. I know they're on Thanksgiving and other days. So enjoy it.
Well, hope you can multitask and do your job well, Dalen. Appreciate you taking a few minutes to join us here on Tuck Talk.
Anytime, man. Be well.
All right. Thanks to Dalen for joining us. Dalen dove in pretty well there on the ACC. I think North Carolina, Duke, again, going to be at the top. Virginia returns a ton of talent. They usually do well with, Bennett does well with that type of roster. Historically, in his time in Charlottesville, Miami has a really good backcourt coming back with Wong and Pack, Nigel Pack, and ACC is going to be stronger, I think, as a whole this season, guys. Your thoughts on where Florida State fits in to the bigger picture of the conference?
I say to be determined only because I kind of want to see how the pieces fit on the floor. But honestly, they're not in that top tier of, say, championship contenders like a North Carolina clearly is because of everybody they got coming back. They're probably not in that second tier that you would say is in that, definite NCAA tournament team that, we think will make it to the second weekend. I think Florida State is probably comfortably in that third tier, maybe an unknown, but how many games can you outcoach? How many games can you steal? Are you composed enough on the road in the ACC to get some of these wins are going to be really, really tough? Can you survive? I think I kind of looked at the schedule leading up to when Baba comes back. For example, they
got Duke and Virginia in there before he gets back, right?
So, yeah, it sucks you got Duke and Virginia, but you're still playing Louisville, Notre Dame, and Georgia Tech. Do you feel like 3-2 is hey, we survived a tough stretch, and now here's a 5-star-ish freshman who's going to lead us in the front court. So, yeah, there's a lot of difficult feelings about where they are, but I kind of feel like you can survive some of that.
The funny thing is, the ACC preseason projection as voted on by the media, and I think is it media and coaches or just media? Florida State's picked fifth. It was before Baba Miller's suspension came down. It's kind of the problem there, but it's North Carolina, Duke, Virginia, Miami, Florida State. Florida State's kind of, I agree, in that second, maybe third tier. I mean, there's a lot of experience in all those places. I mean, you talk about NIL. North Carolina is benefiting from NIL right now. Virginia, it feels like what? Doesn't it feel like ninth year senior Kihei Clark? Like that dude has been there for a decade. Like, and he's it's funny. He's not often a player that kills Florida State just because Florida State's linked, but he's a very talented player, and that'll be a real test, especially like you said, without Baba. I think that's the only time they play him then is relatively early in the season before Baba makes it back in early January. And I mean, Duke's always going to be that team. I mean, first year coach John Shire, I think we're all fascinated to see what the Blue Devils look like in the post Coach K era. It's going to be weird. I mean, for people who've been covering the ACC for a long time to not have him trolling the sidelines, kind of similar to when the Bobby Bowdens of the world, hung it up in the football sphere.
Yeah, and I like Florida State this season. I think if things get put together, as Curt mentioned earlier, if they can handle that early part of the year, once you get to ACC play, Baba comes back, I think you've got a shot to make a run there. I like Syracuse as well this year, as well as Notre Dame. I think there'll be some good teams. And I'm fascinated to see how Wake Forest does. They had a really good year in year one under Coach Forbes. Now we've got to figure out if they can sustain and really get Wake back to playing at the level that they did the days of Coach Prosser when he was in Wake. And you had guys like, Chris Paul and Chris Bosch running through that program in Winston-Salem. Guys, schedule real quick, some exciting matchups. Let's run through some ones that are eye-opening. I like UCF, game 2 of the season in Orlando. That could be a test. And then you've got Florida in Tallahassee. I think that's the day before the Louisiana football game. So that should be
Correct.
That should be a fun weekend for Noles fans. 8:00, November 18th in the Tuck. And then, of course, you get the ESPN Orlando Invitational with teams that should help boost the resume. And then you get Purdue, which, by the way, guys, like, why is FSU and Purdue married to each other? I don't understand the fascination from the ACC or the Big Ten on this, but those are early in non-conference play that have caught my eye.
Yeah, I think it is not a year where you look at the non-conference and it's a dreadful murderer's row. I think in some ways Florida State will benefit from that, but I think Florida's going to be good under Todd Golden, new head coach there. I think Purdue may not be the power that it was last year when a lot of people thought they were kind of the national championship favorites at that point in the year when Florida State went up there and suffered a pretty lopsided loss. But they're still extremely talented. Who's that 7'4"? What's the 7'4" guy they have? Or 7'5"? Do you know what I'm talking about? Is it Zach?
Edey.
Yeah. They still got some players there. And like you said, I mean, they're gonna have to do Virginia and Duke without Baba, and that will be no easy task on both fronts. But it is a non-conference slate. I mean, I think if you're a local, I think you like that probably the two best non-conference games, Purdue and Florida, are both at home. It's a good slate of home games in that regard, and we'll see what happens what this team does get through. I mean, you hope they avoid the bad loss. That's the kind of thing that can be devastating for the RPI, for the net in that stretch of games there.
Two kind of duh statements, but I feel like you have a shot realistically to beat any of the non-conference teams not named Purdue. And I think Florida is set up on the schedule where it's just early enough to give you some momentum. If you go into that game, just like you said, Todd Golden, first-year coach, maybe he's still feeling things out with who are my players, what are my rotations, how's this all going to work? If you beat Florida, a little bit of momentum, makes you feel good. It's a nice resume-building, good feel win to get you started going into later November into December.
Yeah, you got also St. John's, guys, in Sunrise in the Orange Bowl Classic. I think last year, didn't the game get canceled? Was there a COVID issue? Florida State.
That was when FSU had its COVID issues, if memory serves.
They were supposed to play UCF down there.
Correct.
Yeah, so they'll be back, South Florida Noles. Those of you looking forward to it in Sunrise where the Panthers play. The Noles are back in that 2:30 p.m. on December 17th. And St. John's has had some really good teams in the past, and that'll be one to keep an eye on. At least you'll be playing a tough-nosed, brand of basketball that day, and you'll know what you get with St. John's. But last thing that pointed out, Curt kind of alluded to it. this seems abnormal, right? You got 4 ACC games before the calendar year turns to 2023. And wow, I mean, they got handed a tough slate too at Virginia on December 3rd. You know, right after you play Purdue in the middle of the week, you got to go to Charlottesville. That'll be tough. Then you get a week off at least, and you come back home to play Louisville on December 10th. That's at the Tuck. You should be okay against them this year. We'll see. I believe they lost
their exhibition
by 10. They scored 47 points total.
I think Tallahassee, not Tallahassee native, but L. Ellis, I think feels like they're only especially good player.
Woof. I mean, 47 points in a scrimmage to a D2 team and you lose. So then you get Louisville there. That should be a win. But then, as you mentioned, you know, Notre Dame and Tallahassee, who, by the way, it doesn't matter. Notre Dame gives Florida State fits every single year. Bray has a recipe for Florida State's defense that works. So that's going to be an eye-opener for me. I think I'm going to be keeping my eye out on that. And then Duke. You get 10 days, which is interesting. From December 21st to December 31st, Florida State's not playing a game. And sometimes they've been in those, you know, holiday classics we've seen in the past. Sometimes they try to fit one in, maybe like a non-conference game against a beatable opponent there right before the kids go to break. This year, they're going to get a full 10 days to prepare for the Duke Blue Devils in Cameron Indoor. And so we'll keep our eye out on that. But guys, let's wrap up here with a couple questions. Give me best case scenario for Florida State, worst case scenario for Florida State.
Oh boy.
I'd say the worst case is obvious. I think what they've already lost, I think there's absolutely a world where they're in a pretty deep hole by the time they get Baba back. And I mean, they're one injury away from really being in trouble, frankly, kind of like they were for a decent amount of last season with injuries. A few players kind of feel like the can't lose guys if you want to have a team that's contending to make it back to the tournament. So I think, unfortunately, with where they're already at with that, there's reason to be concerned there as a distinct possibility. Best case, this is absolutely a team. Like we said, there are enough intriguing pieces where if they all make big enough jumps forward, if Florida State is as good a three-point shooting team as Leonard Hamilton seems to think they are, because I think that can be a real strength in quite a few spots, I think this could absolutely be a tournament team that's in a good enough spot once they get the kind of rejuvenation of a guy like Baba back in the rotation, and they are a tournament team. I'm not sure, especially with only half a year of Baba, I probably wouldn't pick them above maybe like an 8 seed. That feels like maybe their ceiling, unless like they really surprise me. But I still think after missing the tournament last year, I mean, it would be nice to kind of start a new trend in that regard.
I think worst case scenario is you lose another, you can't lose a Cam Corrin. You can't lose a Naheem McLeod. You can't get in foul trouble a lot of nights. And I think a lot of coaches will know if we get those two guys in foul trouble, forget about it. It's going to be all over. So I think worst case scenario is injuries or foul trouble there. Best case, again, optimistically looking at it, I think you can make a run. You can stack some wins with this non-conference schedule. I'm somewhat optimistic there are some winnable ACC games early before you get Baba back. I just feel like getting a guy like Baba Miller back, even though he's going to have to be worked into those rotations, I think you can do it within a practice enough at that point of the season where you can kind of get him in really quickly. Like it might take a game or two, seriously, but I don't think it's going to take him very long to get really acclimated because he's had the chance to practice with them this whole time while he's been out.
I'm with both of you. I think, worst case scenario would include losing more players. I just think if this team stays healthy for the year, and again, we're recording this before the first game of the season against Stetson, this team's going to make the tournament. I really do believe that. Like, they're good enough. The talent's there. They have enough experience, and the coaching staff's got enough experience to be able to figure this out in the ACC and do enough to make the tournament. Worst case would be, again, if they lost a few players and they missed the tournament again. But best case, I think it's a team that can make a Sweet 16 once they get to an NCAA tournament. It's got enough pieces. The backcourt should be pretty strong, which is a key in March Madness. And then we'll see what Baba Miller does, because he could just be kind of that unicorn that people don't have an answer for. And obviously we're projecting, and some of this is hopeful, but that's a big deal there. And if Matt Cleveland takes that next step, Cleveland has ability to be an all ACC caliber player. Like, he's that kind of talent. And I think we're all looking forward to that as a whole. All right, last thing. Give me one player you're most intrigued to watch this season before we say goodbye.
We talked about this some in the round table that was coming on the side, I think, on Sunday. At least I didn't. In my answer, it was one of the questions. I'm going to go with Cam Fletcher. I think he's a guy who can do a lot of different things. He's versatile. He's probably one of your more consistent 3-level scorers, a guy who can both attack the basket, is very freakishly athletic, and also I think is capable of being a strong perimeter shooter. And I think, Stan Jones talked about it a little bit. It was never about effort for last year for him. Sometimes he almost tried too hard, and it led to defensive issues. If he can kind of, with the year under his belt, be a more consistent defender, I think that will be a big deal for him.
I think Cam Fletcher was my answer, just to throw out a different name. I think Naheem McLeod has to take that level of growth, a big jump. Again, not so much offensive, not so much free throw shooter. I think that's going to be a tough growth area for him. But again, defense, altering shots, maybe more than shot blocking, just altering the path to the basket. If he does a little bit of that, I think that's pretty significant. And then we'll see where he can go from there.
I'll go with, I'm most intrigued to see Matt Cleveland. And because I thought I had very high expectations last year for him, he's put in a lot of work this offseason and he's started to take steps forward. I really look for him to have that season where if he's not a first-round pick, he's at least a second-round pick. And that would mean good things for Florida State because he's got the athleticism and the size to be able to give anybody a problem in the ACC or in the country. But all right, good first episode, guys. I think pretty decent synopsis for the fans. Monday, 7:00 against Stetson. Get your tickets. Go cheer on the guys at the Tucker Center. It's a full day, by the way, of basketball. 11 a.m. Brooke Wyckoff makes her official debut as head coach, as a non-interim tag, as the lady in charge of the Seminoles and the women's basketball program against Bethune-Cookman. So full day at the Tuck. We'll all be there covering. And I want to thank Stan Jones and Dalen Cuff for joining us here on Tuck Talk. We hope to have it for you every single week, periodically and regularly throughout the season as the Noles look to make it back to the NCAA tournament. For Curt Weiler, for Bob Ferrante, I'm Ariya Massoudi saying so long, and you're listening to Tuck Talk.